Imagine the government telling you, "We're taking your home not for a road or a school, but so a private developer can build something else, something that might make the city more money." That's not a hypothetical. On June 23, 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court in Kelo v. City of New London ruled 5-4 that economic development is a legitimate public use under the Fifth Amendment's Takings Clause. This decision redefined eminent domain, essentially allowing local governments to seize private property and transfer it to other private entities for projects they believe will create jobs and increase tax revenue. For Suzette Kelo and her neighbors, this meant losing their homes, not to genuine public infrastructure, but for a proposed private development tied to a new Pfizer plant. How did we get to a point where a city could condemn a person's home to make way for a different private owner? Imagine owning your home, paying your taxes, maintaining your property, only to have a city declare your land could be put to better use by a private developer. This wasn't a hypothetical fear for Suzette Kelo and her neighbors in New London, Connecticut, in the early 2000s. Their homes, some passed down through generations, were slated for demolition not for a public road or school, but to make way for a private economic development project. On June 23, 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered a controversial 5-4 ruling in Kelo v. City of New London, a decision that fundamentally reshaped our understanding of property rights. This landmark case affirmed that governments could, under the Fifth Amendment's Public Use Clause, condemn private land and transfer it to another private entity if the transfer served a public purpose, specifically economic development. The implications were immediate and far-reaching, sparking outrage and legislative reform efforts across the nation. Today, nearly 2 decades later, the shadow of Kelo continues to loom large. The question of when your home isn't really yours anymore is as relevant now as it was then, especially as urban renewal projects and ambitious infrastructure plans gain momentum in 2026. What exactly happened in New London? How did a beloved, little pink cottage become the epicenter of a national debate on eminent domain? We're going to break down the meticulous chronology of this case, from the initial redevelopment plans that targeted the Fort Trumbull neighborhood, to the intense legal battles waged by homeowners, and ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision that left many asking, where do our property rights truly begin and end? Make way for what the city called a broader economic development plan. Central to this struggle was Suzette Kelo and her cherished little pink cottage in the Fort Trumbull neighborhood, which became a national emblem in the eminent domain debate. In 1998, with the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer establishing a new facility nearby, the city of New London initiated an ambitious economic development plan. This plan, spearheaded by the privately owned New London Development Corporation, included Kelo's property and 14 other residential properties. The city justified the forced acquisition under the Fifth Amendment's Public Use Clause, arguing that increased job creation and tax revenue constituted a public benefit. The fundamental conflict here was clear. Property owners like Suzette Kelo believed public use meant literal public access, like a highway or a school, not private commercial ventures. Instead of fair market value offers to sell, homeowners faced condemnation proceedings to seize their land, sparking a legal battle that would go all the way to the nation's highest court. This directly challenged the core understanding of the Fifth Amendment's thorny language, which states that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. This entire legal battle hinged on just 10 words from the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This is known as the Takings Clause. Historically, the phrase public use had been interpreted quite narrowly by courts. It generally referred to land taken for direct public access or utility, like building a highway, a bridge, a post office, or a public school. The government could take your property if it was for tangible public infrastructure. But in New London, the city, through the New London Development Corporation, argued for a far broader interpretation. Their contention was that public use should extend to public purpose, or economic development, meaning if redeveloping the land could boost tax revenue or create jobs, it constituted a legitimate public use. This was a significant legal expansion, moving beyond a park or a fire station to allowing private entities to benefit from condemned property. The Supreme Court was therefore tasked with answering a fundamental constitutional question. Under what precise circumstances can the government take your private property? The case of Kelo v. City of New London, 545 U.S. 469, 2005, was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court on February 22, 2005. Just 4 months later, on June 23, 2005, the court delivered its landmark 5-4 decision, affirming a prior 4-3 ruling by the Connecticut Supreme Court. The majority held that economic development does indeed constitute a public use under the Fifth Amendment's Takings Clause. This meant that governments could, under the guise of public purpose, condemn private property not for direct public access like a road or school, but for transfer to other private developers if it served a perceived community benefit, such as job creation or an increased tax base. Essentially, the court redefined public use, expanding it to encompass public purpose. Justice Stevens, writing for the majority, asserted that the city's plan, though benefiting private parties, was designed to regenerate the local economy, thereby serving a public purpose. This effectively granted governments significantly broader power to seize private homes and businesses for private development projects, profoundly altering the landscape of property rights across the nation. The June 23, 2005 decision in Kelo v. City of New London ignited immediate and widespread public backlash, perceived by many as a significant erosion of individual property rights. The ruling effectively declared that if a city believed taking private land could generate more tax revenue or create jobs, it could use eminent domain to seize that property, even if it meant displacing homeowners. The irony of this decision became tragically clear in New London itself. The specific economic development plan for which Suzette Kelo and 14 other property owners' homes were condemned ultimately failed. The promised Pfizer expansion and associated commercial ventures never materialized. By 2010, 5 years after the Supreme Court's ruling, the very land where Suzette Kelo's cherished Little Pink Cottage once stood, along with the adjacent condemned properties, remained largely undeveloped. It was, for years, an empty, overgrown lot, a stark testament to the unfulfilled promises of economic revitalization. Homeowners, like the Dury family, who had lived in their Fort Trumbull homes for generations, lost their property for a project that simply vanished. This outcome fueled widespread calls for legislative reform at the state level to curtail what many saw as an abuse of eminent domain power. The Kelo legacy, a call for reform. The Kelo decision, delivered on June 23, 2005, did more than just settle a legal dispute. It ignited a nationwide political and legislative firestorm, sparking what many termed the Kelo backlash. Property rights advocates and conservative legal groups, like the Institute for Justice, galvanized support, arguing that the ruling fundamentally redefined the sanctity of private property. In the wake of the decision, over 40 states, including Texas and Ohio, moved to pass new laws and constitutional amendments aimed at limiting eminent domain power, specifically restricting its use for private economic development projects. For instance, in 2006, California voters approved Proposition 90, which sought to prevent eminent domain for private gain, though its implementation proved complex. This legislative activity underscored the deep public discomfort with a ruling that, to many, implied your home wasn't truly yours. If a city could claim a private developer might generate more tax revenue. It brought into sharp focus the ongoing tension between individual property rights and governmental power, leaving homeowners to question what protections truly remained for them. Ultimately, the Kelo decision underscored a fundamental tension in American law: the individual's right to property versus the government's power to promote community welfare. While states swiftly enacted reforms in response, the Supreme Court's 2005 ruling remains a powerful precedent, shaping how local governments weigh economic benefit against the sanctity of private ownership. It's a reminder that the definition of public use isn't static, and its interpretation directly impacts where we live and how secure our property truly is. Considering this delicate balance, have you ever experienced a situation in your community where eminent domain was used or proposed for economic development? Share your experience in the comments below. And to stay informed on how legal decisions like Kelo continue to shape our rights and communities, subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in another contentious property rights case, my breakdown of Penn Central Transportation Co. v. City of New York and how it redefined regulatory takings is exactly the next thing you should watch. This video presents publicly documented information. It is for educational purposes, not legal advice.